Join us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Ruben. Good morning, Ayo.
Good morning.
Good morning, Rufai.
Good morning.
Let us talk about what is happening around the world. In yet another escalation of the crisis in the Middle East, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard says it has launched tens of missiles at Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces say the number of ballistic missiles towards Israel is actually closer to 200. Now, sirens had been going on and off across Israel as the IDF launched intercepted missiles to bring those rockets down. Israel also says that it has suspended landings and takeoffs at its main international airport. Iran has also warned Israel that it will be targeted again if Israel retaliates. Now, you may remember that Iran struck Israel in April, and that was in retaliation for an attack by Israel on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, back in Syria. Now, back then, Iran gave far more notice of its strikes, being that they were more so a response to the Damascus bombing, but not sent to cause too much damage. It's unclear at this stage how many missiles are getting through into Israel and what response could be drawn from Tel Aviv. But we do know that Israel has already said that Iran will pay for its actions. And its biggest backer, the United States, amid fears of a full-scale war between the two foes, has also established its support behind Israel, as we can all expect. We'll come to you all for comments, but let's move on now to the vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Now, both relative newcomers to the national political spotlight, but they faced off overnight in the only scheduled vice presidential debate before the November election. Now, the pair tackled a host of issues, including Iran's strikes against Israel, which was actually the first topic of debate. They were asked if they would support a preemptive strike against Iran. Let's take a listen to their answers.
What's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House.
We have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well.
Well, I mean, very interesting comments between the both of them. It is important to note that Kamala Harris, not just yet anyway, does not have an administration. I believe he was referring to Joe Biden. And even then, I will say that it was a largely civil and relatively restrained conversation about the issues on tops of the minds of American voters going into the 5th of November election. In that, it was unlike the two presidential debates that we had seen earlier this year. Now, both men spent much more time attacking each other's running mate than each other. There were also some reports that noted that their debate was far more presidential than the presidential debates that we've seen so far. Now, Tim Walz did have a shaky start, but he did find his footing when he was discussing the January 6th insurrection and also issues like abortion. J.D. Vance, too, had a largely polite outing. So that was the back and forth between the vice presidential debate overnight. And then lastly, Mark Rutte, the new Secretary General of NATO, says that he does not see any imminent threat of nuclear weapons being used by Russia, despite what he calls reckless and irresponsible rhetoric by the Kremlin. Just last week, President Vladimir Putin said Russia was considering changing its military doctrine to regard an attack from a non-nuclear state, such as Ukraine, that was backed by a nuclear-armed one to be a joint attack. Now, Putin's comments came as Ukraine sought approval to use long-range Western missiles against military sites in Russia. Now, the former Dutch Prime Minister, who is now the president of NATO, was speaking at his first press conference since taking over of the head of the military alliance, and said that 3 priorities for his term as Secretary General would be to support Ukraine, to bolster NATO's collective deterrence, and to build relationships in other parts of the world, such as the Indo-Pacific. Reply.
Okay, so a couple of things. I think the standards in America are falling completely. If this wishy-washy debate, where they still traded a lot of lies, and it's especially by JD, both of them lied, but JD has lied more, is called civil and polite, then America has lost their democracy. I am sad for America.
Okay.
J.D. Vance pivoted on many policies. All of a sudden, you see what he said on abortion? They are now more progressive on abortion. They want women to be able to have access, rights on their body.
Trying to appeal to women voters.
But that's not the policy on ground. This was the same person that was seen to have supported an abortion ban when he was just in Senate. So if this is what they call civil, and both of them didn't even have a good show as far as I'm concerned. And that's why when you saw I think the poll that came out, it was, I think J.D. Vance was 51, he was 49, I think Walz. Walz too couldn't even respond when the issue of Tiananmen Square was brought in front of him that said, okay, you claimed you were in Tiananmen Square at this point in time. When you were in China when Tiananmen Square thing happened, and they had backdated that he was lying. So many lies back and forth. And they said they talked about the issue. I didn't even see any coherent policy position as regards the issue. Till today, Kamala, after even releasing the economic plan, we don't still know where we are going. As regards that, the economic plan even left me more confused. Apart from, the tax waivers for families, 6,000 tax, 5,000 tax for families and everything. Really? Her plan, too, was going to increase the deficit. It's just that Trump's plan is going to increase the deficit more. So both of them, it just shows the standards are falling. I mean...
So you weren't impressed at all by any of the candidates?
I'm sorry, in general, this campaign, and I must have to say, it's been a trend since 2016 when Trump came on. This quality of candidates are falling. The last major quality candidates I've had in recent time in American election was probably Mitt Romney versus Obama, 2012. As is after the election cycle, it's been slippery slope. As regards Iran, they had to show that they too could put up a fight, but it didn't work in their favor. Out of the over 200 missiles, none of them hit the target. American defense system was strong, Israeli defense system was strong. Israel is going to attack them, but like I was saying recently, Iran does not even have the capacity to be able to get in. Probably what they will do is resort to guerrilla warfare. And the Israeli security service have more intelligence, so that's also going to be hard for them. So because they have the backing of America, it's going to be problematic for them. Israel is fighting on many fronts because they are having the backing of America.
Right.
Probably the people that can deal them a blow with their insurgent rockets will be the likes of the Hezbollah, maybe one of them or two of them, or the Houthi rebels that come in.
Which are backed by Israel and which are backed by Iran as well.
I think largely what it will still be is the case of trying to explore that ceasefire option. But will Israel listen? I doubt, because Israel is having the momentum. And Netanyahu is fighting for his political career. So it's just a dicey situation. And that's why some concerns are being raised about the Third World War. It's in the offing, really. And with all the madness Putin is threatening and all of that, because Ukraine is getting some traction in that war, the world is at a very precipitous situation. It is sad that we are fighting wars, 3 different major wars, after a world pandemic.
All right, well, some people it has been described actually as a significant escalation, even though, like you've mentioned, it wasn't very successful based on Israel's defense and also in alliance with their Western allies, not just the United States, the UK, Australia, a few of them also, helped in defending and shooting down those missiles. However, what as has been said, it's almost as if Iran was baited. They took the bait, and now Israel has a position to now say they are going to retaliate, they're going to attack. So what Iran did, even though it didn't hit the target. So that's the conversation going on right now. The United Nations is coming in to say that, let's aim for a ceasefire. Let's think of humanitarian concerns, the humanitarian crisis this could potentially lead to. We already heard stories of, especially in places like Lebanon, for instance, where there are displaced people. We know you talked about the kafala system recently. A number of, them are stranded because they don't have their passports. As domestic students, domestic staff members are stranded because they don't have their passports because of the kafala system. system. Their bosses have fled with their passports. So just a lot of things going on. And of course, wouldn't want, and this is happening on the back of conversations being had at UNGA where they try to move for peace and the escalation of tensions. This is coming on the heels of that. I do believe that Israel is going to retaliate. They now have almost a legitimate reason to retaliate and then hit the target that they've been wanting to hit. I don't know how Iran is going to fight back. Yes, you've mentioned the Houthi rebels. You've talked about Hezbollah and the allies that they formed. I don't know how strongly they would stand against Israel and the United States of America. Very quickly on J.D. Vance. With regards to his change or shift in position of abortion, he did say that it was because his people in Ohio voted massively in support. So in respect of their views, they decided to be a bit more moderate with their stance on abortion. But of course, it's political speak. They see that it's one of the critical conversations that have happened, and the Democratic Party are gaining ground with that narrative, and so they are shifting ground a little bit on that. People did say it was more civil, more presidential, like he says, than their principles. But let's see how that would work out, and hopefully, if Trump would agree to a second debate with Harris.
Never. Well, let me see how I can address the points very quickly in a significant manner. First, Mark Rutte, who is now Secretary General of NATO. A short story about him. When we visited the Netherlands, the Nigerian convoy had arrived. They took us to one location where the Prime Minister would come. Now, we were there waiting. We didn't know that the Prime Minister of Netherlands had arrived. The man came on top of a bicycle. And then he said he was the Prime Minister. So the protocol people were a bit confused. He said, no, he was the Prime Minister, that he was teaching in a school. And he had just left the place, and immediately the protocol people started arranging things. He even said one of his students was a Nigerian student. Anyway, that's an old story. I think I'm getting old, so I tell stories. But now he's the Secretary General of NATO, taking over from Jens Stoltenberg, who was Secretary General for 10 years. Now, what he did yesterday, October 1, was his first major press conference. And at that major press conference, he addressed a number of issues, paying tribute to Jens Stoltenberg, expressing his commitment to the ideas of NATO's 32 members, saying that they have a responsibility to protect 1 billion people that fall under the purview of the 32 people. Euro-Atlantic security, he talked about that. Supporting Ukraine to win the war. These were the major things. And then, working on partnership and cooperation with allies in the Middle East and in other parts of the world. That was the substance of his press conference. It was during the interactive session. And the question about Russia was asked by the reporter from Ukraine news agency about nuclear threat. And it was in that context that he did not think that, nuclear threat is an issue, that Russia will always come up with this nuclear rhetoric. But he said under his watch, NATO will be more concerned about China supporting one of the most difficult wars, in recent times. So that's that about NATO. Mark Rutte, as he settles down, post Jens Stoltenberg as the Secretary General of NATO. Now, the other subject about J.D. Vance, the key takeaways from him. You made one of the points, that they were civil. But in any case, it's not such a significant event. It's not going to have any effect on the outcome of the elections. The two persons focus more on their principles. One, they also were Midwestern, diplomatic in most of the discussions. They both agreed that gun violence is bad and that it has to be addressed. They both agreed that something also has to be done about violence in the United States. But the issues they didn't agree on. January 6th, invasion of the Capitol, was made it made it an issue and asked Vance that, what do you think and all that. He said, no, I want to look into the future. I don't want to look back. I don't want to look back. So he tried to dodge the question. There was controversy also on the issue of health care. They disagreed on that because Vance was saying Trump, right? That was saying Trump, was opposed to Obamacare, affordable care. He says he has a plan. So he asked the Republican to tell us
What
the plans are.
Yes.
And the man said, oh, a 900-page bill that we are working on, you don't expect me to bring it up in a stage debate. There was also the issue about what had been saying about his traveling to China 30 times. Yes. I think the moderator fact-checked him, and then he said, oh, maybe about 15 times. But some critics said, look, it looks like the moderator was partial,
yes.
In that regard, fact-checking one party and not fact-checking the other. And then there was the issue about the pets and dogs that they are purportedly eating in Springfield, Ohio. Springfield, Ohio.
The dogs.
So, but...
Which they are not doing. Let's be clear.
I think Vance
That's not
defended
happening.
that well. He said his interest is in the people. It's about the people, the American citizens that are in Ohio. Because the migrants have taken over everywhere. They've taken over the jobs, they've taken over the hospitals, and all of that. But at the end of the day, it was fact-checked to say the 12,000 to 15,000 Haiti migrants that are in Ohio, they are legal migrants. So border security, border control, immigration, these were some of the major highlights. But as I said, it's not going to make any difference one way or the other. But it's good to see the vice presidents also sparring. By popular consensus, I think, in what I have read, people think that J.D. Vance performed better. Wiles didn't wake up early. Even
so
when
it took him a while to thaw a little bit, I think.
But the second one.
Yes.
Let me just mention,
Go ahead.
Adefemi, that very quickly on the Israel story.
Yes.
The descriptions of how effective the missiles were in terms of the launch is different from it depends on who is reporting.
Yes.
So on Israel's side, they say nothing happened. On the Iranian side, though, they say that 90% of their targets were targeting some air bases, and they were able to fulfill that. But of course, like we said yesterday, that there's always there'll be the Israeli side, the Iranian side, and then in the middle somewhere there is the truth. But just to present those sides.
No, but
Thank you very much.
Any victory. They just said, and this was the Iranian armed forces speaking. They were just saying that they targeted military assaults. They didn't say if it hit the target.
No, they said 90% of it was successful.
They said they just targeted military assets. It wasn't.
That was, I guess those were the initial and then subsequent reports.
The bigger issue is that America, the US, is saying that they will protect Israel.
Yes.
The American President Biden says we will fully support Israel.
Right.
3 times.
3 times. Just in case anybody was unsure of where the United States support is. But let's move on to newspaper headlines across the globe. We begin in Nigeria with This Day. And This Day leads with updates from Nigeria's Independence Day parade. Governors across the country also hosted their own events marking Nigeria's 64th anniversary. Further, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar has written to the National Assembly seeking a 6-year term rotational presidency. Now, the New Telegraph at the top of today's edition is news there that fuel importations saw a 35% increase in September, taking fuel imports to a 6th-month high. The article goes on to say that importers have flooded Nigerian port jetties with 165 million tons of PMS worth 140 billion naira. Now, the Daily Trust, amid the pomp and pageantry of the Independence Day parades, were also protests, which are featured, as I've said, on the front page of the Daily Trust. The hashtag Fearless in October demonstrations took place in Lagos, Ondo, Osun, but were halted, according to this headline, in areas like Abuja. Now, the Punch stays with the protest, reporting low nationwide turnout. Despite that, at least 10 people were arrested in Kano, and states including Kaduna, Plateau, and Nasarawa largely stayed away from the protest. Let's move on to the Daily Nation in Kenya. And that looks at Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, who is in the fight of his political life. Now, he's facing impeachment, which he says is due to his outspoken nature. Now, Gachagua captured the limelight in the run-up to the 2022 elections when he vehemently opposed President Uhuru Kenyatta's choice of preferred successor. Kenyatta back then was campaigning heavily for former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, but Gachagua allied himself with William Ruto, Kenyatta's then deputy, who was angling for the presidency, if you remember. Now, the cover of the Daily Nation notes how President William Ruto's silence on the matter is deafening and marks perhaps a breaking of their political union. Moving on to the Daily Graphic of Ghana, and it features an image of Jean Mensa, who is the chairperson of Ghana's Electoral Commission. And she's asked political parties and other stakeholders to trust Ghana's Electoral Commission to deliver a free and fair election come December. Okay. And then moving on to UK papers, the Daily Mirror's front page reads, "Revenge from above," as Iran retaliates for Nasrallah's killing and Israel's incursion into Lebanon. And also the Daily Express has the US threatening, as we've just discussed, a severe response to Iran's missile attack, again taking the temperature in the Middle East just that much higher. It is a lot going on there.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Well, hellfire.
Oh,
Fire from above.
from above.
The skies of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem lit up by 8 p.m. Their local time yesterday. Well, the world, we hope, would survive.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Adofemi.